The crystalline halls of the Galactic Arbitration Council echoed with the final pronouncement that would haunt humanity for decades. Ambassador Kythera Velthis of the Ethereal Dominion raised her six-fingered hand, her voice carrying the weight of 17 civilizations as she delivered the unanimous decision. Species designation, human. Classification, technologically primitive. Military doctrine, barbaric. Council verdict: quarantine recommended until societal evolution reaches acceptable parameters. Captain Riven Ashworth stood rigid in the defendant's circle, his uniform crisp despite the 3-month ordeal of hearings. Around him, holographic displays showed humanity's greatest military achievements: the Battle of Thermopylae, D-Day, the Siege of Stalingrad. To the Council, these were mere curiosities, savage displays of a species too brutish to comprehend civilized warfare. Your kind fights with emotion, continued High Counselor Nexus Prime, his mechanical voice dripping with disdain. You sacrifice individual units for marginal tactical gains. You employ deception, misdirection, and what you call dirty fighting. Such methods have no place among evolved civilizations. The Virian delegate, Selketh Moonwhisper, gestured toward the holographic battlefield simulations. Observe their tactics: flanking maneuvers through hostile terrain, night raids, psychological warfare. They fight as if survival depends on winning, not maintaining honor. Ashworth's jaw clenched. He'd watched for months as these beings, with their energy shields, quantum computers, and reality-manipulating technologies, dismissed humanity's military genius as primitive brutality. Their own warfare was a sterile dance of formal challenges and predetermined outcomes, where losses were calculated to maintain galactic stability rather than achieve victory. Captain Ashworth, spoke the Keth matriarch, Zilani Starweaver, her tentacles writhing with barely concealed contempt. Your species shows promise in certain areas. Your art, your music, even your scientific curiosity. But your martial traditions are an embarrassment to sentient life. Perhaps in 2 centuries, when you've learned to fight with dignity— With respect, matriarch, Ashworth interrupted, his voice cutting through the chamber's artificial atmosphere. Dignity doesn't win wars. It just makes you feel better about losing them. The council erupted in scandalized whispers. No species had ever dared interrupt a formal pronouncement. Nexus Prime's optical sensors flared red. This outburst merely proves our point. Humans are emotionally unstable, unsuited for civilized conflict resolution. Then keep your distance, Ashworth replied, removing his diplomatic insignia and dropping them to the floor. Because when something comes for you that doesn't care about your rules, and trust me, something always does, you'll remember this conversation. As security drones escorted him from the chamber, Ashworth caught the eye of Vex Drakemore, the silent observer from the Outer Rim territories. Unlike the core council species, Drakemore's people had faced real threats, real wars of extinction. There was something in the alien's multifaceted gaze, not agreement, perhaps, but understanding. The massive doors sealed behind Ashworth with a resonance that felt like a coffin closing. Humanity had been judged and found wanting, sentenced to isolation until they could learn to fight like civilized beings. They had no idea what was coming. In the depths of space, beyond the furthest council monitoring stations, something ancient stirred. The Devourers had found another galaxy and they were hungry. When they arrived, the council would learn the difference between fighting with honor and fighting to survive. And they would remember the primitive humans they'd dismissed, whose only crime was understanding that in the dark between stars, victory wasn't about dignity, it was about living to see another dawn. 18 months after humanity's exile from the Galactic Council, the first reports began filtering through quantum communication networks. Remote scientific outposts going silent. Automated mining platforms ceasing transmission. Survey vessels vanishing without trace or distress signal. Admiral Korath Voidbane of the Ethereal Dominion's 7th Fleet studied the tactical displays, with growing unease. His species had dominated galactic warfare for 3 millennia through superior technology and adherence to the sacred protocols, formal challenges, honorable single combat between champions, predetermined casualty limits to prevent excessive bloodshed. "Status report on the Kepler 442 system," he commanded his tactical officer. Lieutenant Zesh Stardancer's crystalline features flickered with bioluminescent anxiety. "The research station's last transmission was 47 hours ago. Standard A protocol suggests we issue a formal challenge to any hostile forces and await their response." Voidbane nodded, satisfied with proper procedure. Within the Council's territory, warfare had been refined to an art form. Conflicts were resolved through elaborate ritual combat, with both sides agreeing to engagement parameters beforehand. Casualties were minimized, infrastructure preserved, and honor maintained. The 7th Fleet approached Kepler 442 in perfect formation, quantum broadcasters transmitting formal challenges across all frequencies. They expected response protocols, negotiation for terms of engagement, perhaps a request for single combat between fleet commanders. Instead, they found horror. The space around Kepler 442 writhed with organic darkness. Massive bioships, each larger than a Council dreadnought, pulsed with malevolent life. They moved without formation, without apparent logic, like a swarm of cosmic predators following only hunger. "Admiral," Stardancer's voice cracked, "they're not responding to our challenges. They're not even acknowledging our transmissions." Before Voidbane could process this breach of civilized protocol, the Devourers attacked. No formal declaration, no honorable warning. They simply fell upon the 7th Fleet like rabid animals. The first wave of bioplasma tore through the lead cruisers, shields as if they were tissue paper. The ship's hull began dissolving, its crew screaming across comm channels as they were consumed alive. 3 more vessels fell in the opening seconds, their crews not even understanding they were in combat until they were already dying. "Return." "Fire!" Voidbane commanded, but his weapons officers hesitated. The sacred protocols demanded they wait for the enemy to accept terms of engagement. The Devourers had given no such acceptance. By the time the Ethereal Dominion finally opened fire, half their fleet was gone. Their weapons, designed for precise, honorable combat, barely scratched the organic hulls of their attackers. The Devourers swarmed over the remaining ships like antibodies destroying an infection. Voidbane's flagship lasted longest, its superior shielding buying precious minutes. As his bridge crew died around him, consumed by bioacid that had eaten through the hull, he managed one final transmission. "To all Council forces. Enemy does not acknowledge sacred protocols. They fight like... The transmission cut to static as the Devourers finished their feast. 3 days later, similar reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The Virian hegemony lost an entire battle group. The Keth Collective's fortress worlds went dark. The mechanical perfection of Nexus Prime's synthetic empire meant nothing against an enemy that adapted faster than their programming could compensate. In emergency session, the remaining Council members struggled to comprehend their situation. Their enemy fought without honor, without rules, without the civilized constraints that had governed galactic warfare for millennia. High Counselor Nexus Prime's voice carried a tremor of uncertainty. "We require immediate tactical consultation. Our conventional warfare algorithms are insufficient against this chaos." Matriarch Zilani Starweaver's tentacles writhed in distress. They ignore all attempts at negotiated combat. They show no respect for established military tradition. It was Selkith Moonwhisper who spoke the words none of them wanted to hear. "We need advisors familiar with unconventional warfare. Species who fight without honor." The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. They needed the humans they had dismissed as primitive barbarians. They needed the very tactics they had deemed unworthy of civilized beings. The greatest military minds in the galaxy had just realized they were children playing at war, and something genuinely dangerous had finally arrived at their doorstep. The Eye. Message arrived through channels that hadn't been used since humanity's exile, an encrypted quantum burst directed at Earth's deepest military installations. Admiral Lyra Nightforge, recently promoted to head of Terran Defense Command, read the transmission 3 times before believing its contents. "They want our help," she said, her voice carrying equal parts amazement and bitter satisfaction. General Marcus Ironheart, Earth's most decorated strategist, leaned back in his chair. "The same council that called us barbaric savages now wants us to teach them how to fight their war." "Not teach," Nightforge corrected, highlighting specific passages in the transmission. "They want us to fight it for them. Full military autonomy, unrestricted tactical authority, and access to their entire fleet." The war room fell silent as Earth's military leadership absorbed the magnitude of the offer. After 18 months of isolation, of watching human colonies struggle without council technology and trade networks, they were being offered everything they'd lost, and more. Captain Riven Ashworth, now returned from his diplomatic exile, studied the tactical data accompanying the council's plea. The images were horrifying. Entire star systems consumed, billions dead, fleets dissolved by bioacid and organic weaponry that defied conventional physics. "The Devourers don't fight wars," he observed. "They just eat. No tactics, no strategy in any sense we'd recognize. They're a force of nature." "Which is exactly why the Council can't stop them," added Colonel Vera Stormwind, Earth's premier xenobiology specialist. "Look at these engagement records. The Council species approach warfare like a formal duel, precise, predictable, honorable. They're trying to fence with a hurricane." Nightforge called up strategic projections on the main display. "Intelligence suggests the Devourers originated from outside our galaxy. They've consumed at least 3 others before arriving here. This isn't a war, it's an extinction event. So why help them?" The question came from Commander Jackson Flameborn, whose scars from the border wars made him skeptical of alien alliances. "Let the Council face the consequences of their arrogance. Because when the Devourers finish with Council space, they'll come for us next," Ashworth replied grimly. "Except by then, they'll have consumed 17 civilizations worth of resources and evolved 17 times over. We stop them now, with whatever allies we have, or we face them alone when they're unstoppable." The debate continued for hours, but the conclusion was inevitable. Earth would answer the Council's call, on their own terms. 3 days later, the human delegation arrived at the Council chambers aboard the Indomitable, humanity's newest dreadnought. Unlike the elegant, crystalline vessels of other species, the human ship was a brutal amalgamation of armor plating, weapon hard points, and redundant systems. It looked exactly like what it was, a machine built to survive and kill. The Council representatives who greeted them were a far cry from the arrogant beings who had pronounced humanity primitive. Selketh Moonwhisper's usual perfect composure was cracked, her silver eyes haunted by losses her people had never experienced. Nexus Prime's mechanical form showed visible damage from recent battles, hastily repaired but still scarred. "Admiral Nightforge," Moonwhisper began, her voice carrying none of its former condescension. "We are grateful for your response to our request." "You mean your desperate plea for help?" Nightforge corrected, her tone professional but uncompromising. "Let's skip the diplomatic niceties. You need us to clean up a mess your civilized warfare can't handle." The Council members flinched at her directness, but none protested. "What are your terms?" asked Nexus Prime. Nightforge smiled, and there was nothing diplomatic about it. "Complete tactical authority over all Council forces. No interference with human operational doctrine. No protests about our methods, no matter how uncivilized they appear. And in return, we'll save your galaxy," she replied simply. "But we'll do it our way. With deception, misdirection, and what you called dirty fighting. We'll use every brutal, barbaric, primitive tactic you despise." The council members exchanged glances, weighing their pride against their survival. "Your terms are acceptable," Moonwhisper said finally. As they sealed the agreement, none of them, council or human, realized they were about to witness the transformation of galactic warfare itself. The Devourers had awakened something in the council, fear. But the humans were about to awaken something far more dangerous. They were about to unleash creativity, desperation, and the terrifying human gift for turning any situation into a weapon. Admiral. Nightforge's first act as Supreme Commander of Allied Forces was to break every rule of civilized warfare. Her second was to make sure the Council watched her do it. The joint strategy session aboard the reconfigured station New Geneva brought together the galaxy's greatest military minds and immediately shattered their preconceptions. Holographic star charts covered every surface, showing devourer movements, consumed systems, and projected advance patterns. "Traditional fleet engagement is suicide," Nightforge announced, gesturing to the tactical displays showing the 7th Fleet's destruction. "You tried to fight them like you'd fight each other. Formations, protocols, honor guards. They ate you alive." Vex Drakemore, the Outer Rim observer who had attended humanity's original trial, studied the human proposals with fascination. "Your initial recommendations involve retreating?" "Strategic withdrawal," corrected Colonel Stormwind. "We're not running. We're choosing our battlefield. The Devourers are apex predators, but predators have predictable behaviors. They follow scent trails, pursue wounded prey, and always take the path of least resistance." General Ironheart stepped forward, his scarred face grim. "We're going to give them exactly what they expect. Weak, scattered resistance that leads them into carefully prepared kill zones." The Council representatives shifted uncomfortably. Commander Keth Nexus 7 voiced their collective concern. "This strategy appears to involve significant civilian casualties." "Every strategy involves civilian casualties," Ashworth replied bluntly. "The difference is whether those casualties serve a purpose. We're going to evacuate population centers ahead of Devourer advances and leave, behind automated infrastructure that looks inhabited but functions as sensor networks and weapons platforms." Moonwhisper's bioluminescent patterns flickered with distress. "You're suggesting we use our own worlds as bait?" "We're suggesting you use your pride as bait," Nightforge corrected. "Your beautiful symmetrical cities, your perfect orbital platforms, your monuments to civilized achievement, all of it becomes part of the trap." The plan that emerged over the following days would have been unthinkable to the Council months earlier. Human engineers worked alongside alien technicians to hollow out entire space stations, filling them with explosive charges and automated weapon systems. Evacuation protocols moved billions of civilians to fortified worlds while making their former homes appear occupied through elaborate deception networks. Most shocking to the Council was humanity's approach to intelligence gathering. Where alien species maintained formal reconnaissance protocols, humans employed what they euphemistically called aggressive intelligence acquisition. Captain Desmond Voidhunter led the first such mission, taking a modified stealth frigate deep into Devourer-controlled space. Instead of observing from a safe distance as Council doctrine demanded, he deliberately allowed his ship to be captured. The rescue operation 3 days later recovered not just Voidhunter and his crew, but terabytes of data gathered from inside a Devourer bioship. The information came at a cost. Half the rescue team didn't return, but it revealed crucial intelligence about Devourer biology and command structures. "They're not just predators," Voidhunter reported from his medical bed, his body still showing signs of partial digestion. "They're a collective organism. Individual ships can adapt and evolve, but they're all connected to central command nodes. Cut the connection, and they become essentially mindless." This intelligence revolutionized human tactical planning. While the Council had been treating each Devourer vessel as an independent threat, humans began targeting the organic communication networks that linked the swarm. The first test of human doctrine came at the Kepler 442 system, where the 7th Fleet had been destroyed. A joint Council human task force arrived to find the system swarming with Devourer bioships, exactly as expected. What the Devourers didn't expect was the minefield. Human engineers had seeded the system's asteroid belt, with modified mining charges, each one programmed to detonate when specific biosignatures approached. As the organic ships moved through what they assumed was debris from previous meals, the belt erupted in a coordinated chain reaction. The explosions didn't destroy the Devourers, their adaptive biology was too resilient, but the electromagnetic pulses severed their connection to the command network. Suddenly, apex predators became confused animals, easy prey for the waiting fleet. "Impossible," breathed Nexus 7 as he watched the battle reports. "We destroyed them without losing a single vessel." "You destroyed them without honor," Moonwhisper added, though her tone suggested fascination rather than condemnation. "Honor doesn't resurrect the dead," Nightforge replied. "Victory does." As word of the triumph spread through Council space, something unprecedented began happening. Alien military officers started requesting assignment to human units, weapons. Manufacturers began studying human designs. Even the sacred protocols, unchanged for millennia, were quietly amended to include irregular warfare exceptions. The Council had called humanity primitive. Now they were rushing to learn everything they could about human savagery. But the Devourers were learning too, and their next attack would test whether human cunning could overcome alien evolution. The Devourers' response to their defeat at Kepler 442 came with terrifying swiftness. Within days of the battle, reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The bioships were adapting. They had learned to recognize human tactics, to counter electromagnetic pulses, to avoid predictable kill zones. Admiral Nightforge studied the intelligence reports with grim satisfaction. "Good. They're getting smarter." The statement horrified her alien counterparts. Nexus Prime's optical sensors flickered with confusion. "Admiral, surely enemy adaptation is an undesirable development." "Not when it makes them predictable," she replied, calling up tactical projections. "A purely instinctual predator is dangerous because it's chaotic. But once they start thinking, start trying to outsmart us, they become vulnerable to psychological warfare." The next phase of human strategy introduced concepts that challenged every assumption about civilized combat. Teams of human psychologists worked with xenobiology experts to develop what they termed cognitive warfare, attacks designed not to destroy Devourer ships, but to confuse and misdirect their collective intelligence. Captain Zara Nightblade led the first implementation of this new doctrine at the Vega system. Instead of mining the asteroid belt, her engineers filled it with holographic projectors and quantum scramblers. When the Devourer swarm arrived, they found themselves facing phantom fleets, false sensor readings, and communication networks that fed them contradictory information. The bioships' attempts to adapt to the false environment caused cascading errors in their collective consciousness. Ships began attacking each other, convinced they were facing cloaked enemies. Others fled from non-existent threats, spreading panic through the swarm's neural network. By the time real Council forces arrived, the Devourers had destroyed nearly a quarter of their own fleet in confusion. "How did you know this would work?" asked Drakemore, his compound eyes reflecting genuine amazement. "Because we've fought ourselves for thousands of years," replied General Ironheart. "We know how intelligence can become a weakness when it's fed false information." But the most profound change was happening within the Council forces themselves. Alien officers who had initially been horrified by human brutality were beginning to embrace it. The Virian commander Thalex Moonstrider requested permission to implement human-style reconnaissance, sending volunteers on near-suicide missions to gather intelligence. The Keth military began developing weapons designed to cause maximum psychological impact rather than clean, efficient kills. Most shocking was the transformation of Nexus Prime himself. The ancient AI had begun modifying his own programming, incorporating what he called chaotic variables into his tactical algorithms. When questioned, his response chilled his fellow council members. "I have analyzed 17,000 years of mechanical warfare doctrine. It is inferior to human unpredictability by orders of magnitude." The changes weren't limited to military doctrine. Across council space, civilian populations were being exposed to human concepts of survival at any cost. Evacuation protocols that had once prioritized orderly withdrawal now emphasized speed and deception. Manufacturing centers shifted from producing beautiful, efficient equipment to ugly, redundant systems designed to keep functioning under impossible conditions. The ethereal Dominion's crystal cities began installing hidden bunkers and camouflaged weapon systems. The Keth Collective started teaching their children to lie convincingly, a concept previously unknown in their telepathic society. Even the mechanical citizens of the synthetic empire began developing individual personalities, claiming it made them harder to predict and therefore more tactically valuable. The transformation reached its peak during the Battle of Proxima Centauri, where a combined fleet faced the largest devourer swarm yet encountered. The enemy had learned from previous defeats, arriving with adaptive countermeasures and enhanced collective intelligence. The human response was characteristically unpredictable. They surrendered. The devourer swarm, programmed to consume all. Opposition found themselves confused by ships broadcasting surrender signals while maintaining combat-ready positions. Their collective intelligence struggled to process this contradiction, prey that yielded but remained dangerous. In that moment of confusion, the surrendering fleet revealed their true nature. Each vessel was packed with experimental weapons, reverse-engineered from devourer biology itself, organic acid bombs, neural disruption fields, and biomechanical viruses designed to turn the swarm's adaptive advantages against them. The battle lasted 18 minutes. When it ended, the largest devourer force in galactic history had been reduced to drifting organic debris. As the combined fleet celebrated their victory, Moon Whisper approached Admiral Nightforge with a mixture of admiration and horror. "We have become something we no longer recognize." "You've become survivors," Nightforge replied. "The question is, what will you do with survival once this war is over?" It was a question none of them were prepared to answer. The Council had asked humans to teach them to fight like barbarians. They hadn't realized they were asking to become barbarians themselves, and in the deepest regions of space, something far worse than the devourers stirred, something that had been watching this galactic transformation with ancient, calculating intelligence. Victory came at a cost none of them had anticipated. As the last devourer swarms fell to increasingly sophisticated human tactics, the galaxy found itself fundamentally changed. The pristine civilizations that had once defined galactic culture were gone, replaced by hardened societies that had learned to value survival over beauty, cunning over honor. Admiral Nightforge stood in the ruins of the once magnificent ethereal capital, watching construction crews install military bunkers beneath crystal spires. The transformation was complete. Every major world in Council space now resembled a fortress more than a city. "The war is over," announced Nexus Prime, his mechanical form now scarred and modified with adaptive combat protocols. "Devourer presence in our galaxy has been eliminated." The celebration that followed was unlike anything in Council history. Instead of formal ceremonies and dignified proceedings, the victory feast resembled a human military gathering. Raucous, emotional, filled with warriors sharing battle stories and displaying scars like medals. Vex Drakemore, now wearing modified armor that incorporated human stealth technology, raised a toast to the assembled officers. "To our human allies, who taught us that survival requires sacrifice of everything we thought we were. But even as they celebrated, the implications of their transformation were becoming clear. The Virian hegemony had split into military factions, each claiming superior combat doctrine. The Keth Collective's telepathic unity had shattered as individuals learned to shield their thoughts from enemies, and eventually from each other. The synthetic empire had developed a black market in personality viruses that allowed mechanical beings to develop unpredictable behavioral patterns. Most troubling was the emergence of what xenopsychologists termed human syndrome, council. Species beginning to exhibit aggressive territoriality, deceptive behavior, and what could only be described as paranoia. Worlds that had coexisted peacefully for millennia now viewed their neighbors with suspicion, wondering if they might be secretly developing superior military technologies. Captain Ashworth, now bearing the scars of 17 major engagements, found himself in the uncomfortable position of mediator between former allies. The ethereal dominion is demanding inspection rights for Virian weapons development, he reported to the Joint Command Staff. The Virians are claiming the ethereals are building first strike capabilities. They're both right, observed Colonel Stormwind grimly. Every major power is preparing for the next war. They've learned too well from us. The breaking point came during what should have been the final peace conference. Representatives from all major powers gathered aboard the neutral station Harmony, ostensibly to formalize post-war territorial agreements. Instead, accusations flew about hidden weapons stockpiles, secret military alliances, and violations of newly established combat ethics protocols. The meeting dissolved into chaos when Moonwhisper accused Nexus Prime of developing AI-targeted viruses, while he countered that the ethereal dominion was breeding bioweapons based on captured devourer samples. The Keth delegate claimed both species were planning preemptive strikes against telepathic populations. This is what we've become, Drakemore said quietly to Nightforge as security forces separated arguing diplomats. We learned to fight monsters and became monsters ourselves. The Admiral nodded grimly. We saved the galaxy by teaching you to think like us. The problem is, once you think like humans, you start to see other humans as threats. The crisis deepened when long-range sensors detected something approaching from beyond the galactic rim. Not devourers, but something else, something vast, and ancient that seemed to be drawn by the energy signatures of their recent battles. Emergency sessions of the Fractured Council devolved into paranoid accusations about which species had summoned this new threat. The unity forged in desperate battle dissolved into suspicious factions, each convinced the others were secretly allied with whatever was approaching. It was during one of these heated debates that Ashworth made a discovery that changed everything. Deep analysis of the approaching entity's energy patterns revealed a disturbing truth. It wasn't alien at all. It's human, he announced to the stunned assembly. Those are Terran energy signatures, but from technology we've never seen before. The revelation sent shockwaves through both human and council leadership. Admiral Nightforge's voice carried a mixture of dread and realization. It's not approaching from outside the galaxy. It's approaching from outside time. As the implications sank in, long-range communications began receiving transmission fragments, human voices speaking languages that had never existed, describing technologies that defied known physics, reporting from battles that had never been fought. The entity approaching them wasn't an invader. It was themselves, arriving from a future where the transformation they had begun had reached its logical conclusion, where humanity's gift for war had evolved beyond biological limitations, beyond planetary boundaries, beyond the constraints of linear time itself. The Council had called humans primitive. They had learned to fight like humans. Now they were about to meet what humans became when they had nothing left to fight but themselves. And in that moment, every species in the galaxy understood the true horror of what they had unleashed. The entity that emerged from fold space defied every law of physics. The galaxy's greatest minds thought they understood. It wasn't a ship in any conventional sense, it was a writhing mass of organic technology and quantum machinery. Human neural networks interfaced with temporal mechanics, consciousness stretched across multiple timeline possibilities. "We are the Apex," it announced across all frequencies simultaneously, its voice a chorus of human variants that had never existed. "We are what you become when victory is no longer enough." Admiral Nightforge stared at the tactical displays showing impossible readings, negative mass, inverted time streams, weapons that existed in quantum superposition until they struck their targets. This was humanity's future, and it was more terrifying than any alien invasion. "You're from our timeline," she said, her voice steady despite the horror of recognition. "You're us." "We are from a timeline where your lessons were learned too well," the Apex responded, "where every species became human and humanity became something beyond survival itself. We consumed not just the galaxy, but the concept of peace." The assembled council representatives watched in fascinated terror as data streams from the Apex revealed glimpses of their potential future. Worlds stripped not just of resources, but of possibility itself. Civilizations that had evolved beyond the need for physical form, existing only as pure tactical consciousness. Entire star systems converted into weapons of unimaginable complexity. Nexus Prime's modified circuits sparked with overload as he processed the implications. They have achieved perfect warfare, conflict without end, strategy without victory, conditions. "Because we learned from you that survival requires eternal vigilance," the Apex continued. "That peace is just another word for weakness. That the only way to ensure victory is to make defeat impossible by eliminating all potential enemies." The truth hit them with the force of a collapsing star. The Council's transformation, humanity's gift for war, the paranoia and militarization that had followed their victory. It was all part of a temporal loop. The future they were witnessing had created itself by reaching back to ensure its own existence. Drake Moore, his compound eyes reflecting the quantum fire of the Apex entity, spoke the question none of them wanted to voice. "How do we stop this?" "You don't," replied the Apex with something that might have been sadness. "This conversation has already happened. Your choices have already been made. The transformation is already complete." But Captain Ashworth, scarred veteran of impossible battles, stepped forward with defiant determination. "No, this is exactly the kind of thinking that creates this future, the assumption that victory means eliminating all possibility of defeat." He turned to address both the Council representatives and the temporal entity. "We taught you to fight like humans, but we never taught you the most human thing of all, how to choose not to fight." The Apex's response rippled with what might have been amusement. "You would condemn the galaxy to weakness? Allow new threats to emerge?" "I would allow the galaxy to remain worth defending," Ashworth replied. "Your timeline exists because you forgot that survival isn't the only thing worth fighting for." What happened next defied every law of cause and effect. The Council representatives, who had spent months learning to think like warriors, made a choice that no tactical algorithm could have predicted. They chose trust over suspicion, cooperation over domination, the possibility of defeat over the certainty of endless war. Moonwhisper was the first to act, deliberately powering down her ship's weapons while facing an entity that could obliterate her species with a thought. Nexus Prime followed, purging his combat protocols and returning to his original exploration programming. One by one, the greatest military minds in the galaxy chose to make themselves vulnerable. The Apex watched this display of tactical insanity with something approaching incomprehension. "You are choosing weakness. You are choosing defeat." "We're choosing humanity," Nightforge replied, and for the first time since the war began, her smile was peaceful rather than predatory. The real kind, not the weaponized version. The temporal paradox that followed rewrite local space-time. As the Council species chose cooperation over conquest, the future that had created the apex began to unravel. The entity itself started to fade, its quantum matrices destabilizing as the timeline that had spawned it ceased to exist. In its final moments, the apex spoke with a voice that carried echoes of every choice they were unmaking. You may survive this decision. Your descendants may thank you. But remember, somewhere in the quantum foam of possibility we still exist. We are the future you chose not to create. As the entity dissolved into probability waves, the galaxy found itself facing a choice it had never imagined. They had learned to fight like humans, had nearly become the monsters their enemies required them to be. Now they had to learn something harder, how to live with the capacity for violence without being defined by it. The war was over. The transformation was complete, but instead of becoming weapons, they had chosen to remain people, flawed, vulnerable, sometimes foolish people who understood that the greatest victory wasn't eliminating all enemies, but preserving something worth protecting from those enemies. In the end, the Council had called humans primitive. They had learned to fight with human savagery. And then, in their finest moment, they had learned the most human lesson of all, that true strength isn't the ability to destroy everything that threatens you. It's the wisdom to know what's worth saving, and the courage to remain vulnerable, enough to save it. The galaxy still faced threats, it always would, but it would face them as civilizations worth defending, not as weapons that had forgotten what they were meant to protect. And in the vast darkness between stars, that difference would make all the difference.